Hey guys, so that time again where I do my meta tier list based on Dueling Book data from ygeoscope.com, and as always, a big thanks to my sponsors for supporting the channel. Now, as always, the formula is the same and you can check my first tier list video on how the score is calculated, and for this video we will be using the top cut representation from the Remote Duel Extravaganza, since that was the main event that happened the past weekend and there wasn't a YCS level event. Now, before we get to the tier list, there's always some caveats with using data from ygeoscope.com. The good news is that the site can now identify Spright and Tearlaments. Now, branded Despia still cannot be identified exactly, and as for heroes, now that Fusion Destiny is back at 3, there's likely a burst in non-hero decks that are using the DPE package again and are potentially being miscategorized as heroes, so their numbers will be inflated for this month's tier list, and I'll have to consider not covering them next time. Then there's a variety of other decks that ygeoscope cannot identify at all, such as Rika, Exosisters, Evil Twins, Marincess, or Pure Runic, among many other decks, so these unfortunately will not be included as part of this tier list. So let's get to the tier list, and for the top scoring deck, you guys are not gonna like this, but Spright actually narrowly beat Tears for the first spot. Now, how did this happen? Well, of course, Tears are the better deck, and I think everyone can agree, but interestingly, Spright is being played much more often on Dueling Book in the last 7 days, particularly since there's so many variants, and on top of that, it actually had a really strong top cut showing at the Remote Duel Extravaganza as well. The deck also had a high win percentage on DB at 61%, and so was able to snag that top spot. At a close second is of course Tearlaments, which did have the highest top cut representation at the Extravaganza by one deck. Although none made it to top 4, it is still played a lot on DB as well, and also several variants, and in IRL play, it is likely the best deck of the format. At third is actually Floowandereeze, which has been roaming in the tier 2 category lately, but it also had a good showing at the Remote Extravaganza. And also be on the lookout for my deck profile with Hanko Chow, who finished top 4 at the Extravaganza with Floowandereeze. He'll probably write an article on TCG Player about his Extravaganza experience, and he's also on Twitch now at TTV Hanko Chow, so please go support him as he is an excellent player and you'll learn a lot from watching him play. Anyways, Flu is in a pretty good spot right now, as it is the best anti-meta strategy of choice since Shifter just destroys Tearlaments, not to mention it also has a good matchup against Spright as well. Then we have Mathmech, which has now been in the tier 1 category 3 months in a row on my tier list. It's been getting top cut representation from various events after Power of the Elements, and has a good Spright matchup, but I heard it doesn't do so well against Tears. Anyways, a super consistent strategy that can put up disruptions on your opponent's turn and also able to play many hand traps. It's also a decently budget choice that you can run as a meta contender. Next in tier 2, we start off with the quickly forgotten Sword Soul strategy. Still a consistent one and was a tier 1 strategy really not that long ago. It managed to get a top cut spot at the Extravaganza as well. Having a consistent way to put up a negate, couple pops, among many other things is nice, and make sure to check out my recent Sword Soul profile with my friend Kevin on my channel. Next, we have yet another quickly forgotten deck in branded Despia. Still a pretty strong strategy and was the fusion deck of choice before Tearlaments came onto the scene. Since it can utilize Super Poly well, it's a pretty good deck to run. The Mega Tin reprints have made this deck more affordable as well, and while it did not top any recent events, don't count them out just yet. Then we have Tri-Brigade, which has been emerging lately thanks to Spright, and particularly so since the Ronin Totem ban. I think the Spright version is the way to go, as the Bird Up version seems to have died down, but as long as Tri-Brigade Revolt is around, I think this deck will be a solid tier 2 contender for a while. Next we have heroes all the way up in tier 2, and as I mentioned earlier, this likely is reflective of data quality issues where non-hero decks that are running the DP package now that Fusion Destiny is at 3 again are being potentially categorized as hero, so they are inflating this deck's numbers. Of course, I don't want to take anything away from actual hero players since this deck is a very strong rogue strategy, but I don't think anyone would say it is tier 2 at the moment, and I may have to consider excluding this deck in the tier list moving forward if it continues to look a bit inflated. Then we have Drytrons, which recently got Ben 10 back to 3, so I think it's been popping off lately on Dueling Book and has escaped from its rogue status. Definitely requires a lot of brain power to pilot this deck well, and luckily the Orange Heralds got announced for a reprint in OTS 20, making this deck even more affordable. We then still have Sky Strikers somehow in tier 2, and I think it's because it's just a fan favorite strategy and a lot of players on Dueling Book pilots it and keeps it at tier 2. Its win percentage at 43% was rather miserable and sadly has not topped recent events, but at the same time, I do have a lot of faith in Sky Striker, and if it's being piloted by a big brain player such as Ryan Yu, I'll always have hope that it can top another YCS. Now let's move on to Rogue, and we start off with Eldritch. Pretty interesting since Red Reboot got banned, so I expected more of trap decks, at least at the start of the format, but looks like Eldritch has fallen in popularity despite it being in the tier 2 category in the last half year or so, thanks to the branded cards. With so many powerful traps and floodgates at 3 and Red Reboot gone, not a bad time to turn to the dark side and explore Eldritch as a deck to run for the format. Next, a deck that I was hoping to no longer see on my tier list is Mystic Mind Burn. Sadly, the card did not get banned and was still winning about half of its matches on Dueling Book. All about stalling and burning your opponent to death or win with Final Countdown, it is clearly one of Konami's favorite strategies. Then we have Ad Ignister, which along with the small Mathmech package was showing a lot of promise but still seems to be in that rogue section. Arrival at Ignister is typically pretty hard to out, but against something like Spright, unfortunately it can just get run over with the help of pixies. Still a strong rogue choice though if you are looking for a new strategy. Next we have another favorite strategy in Silent Mangrate, which is now consistently being categorized in the rogue section after having a solid run of tier 2 for a bit. Its win percentage of 42% in the last 7 days on DB was even worse than Sky Striker, and perhaps they're just having a bad week, but it's still a fairly reliable strategy and still pretty budget as well, outside of Access Code Talker. And then we have another old strategy in Altergeist, which after that top 8 at Euros, I don't think it's had too much IRL competitive success, still winning a solid amount of matches at 51%, and again, with the ban of Red Reboot, it's time for trap heavy strategies to shine even brighter. Next we have Punk, and this can get a bit difficult to tell with YGO because I don't know if this is referring to decks using Punk cards as an engine or pure Punk. Now as for pure Punk, this strategy was popular for a very short time right after the release of Power of the Elements, but since has died down quite a bit. With the ban of Chaos Ruler, I'm actually not sure how this engine still provides support, so feel free to enlighten me on that, but looks like it wasn't doing so well at a 45% match win percentage. We then have Trickstars, where I'm sure with the recent release of Light Stage, a lot of players were happy to try this strategy out. Sadly, they probably quickly realized it's not good at all this day and age, and with a 38% win percentage in the last 7 days, Trickstar can still be used as an engine of course, such as in some Spright builds, but the pure strategy is probably not the best way to play it anymore. Lastly, in Rogue, we have Dinos, which sort of struggle as well at 46% match win percentage. Now, these numbers are likely including some Dinomorphia values as well, unfortunately, but either way, Dinos are a rogue strategy at this point and has been unable to top any events in the recent time frame. Lastly, in the other section, I continue to be baffled by the fact that there are enough players running True Draco to make it to the top 20 decks being played right now. It's honestly awful at the moment, but it is super cheap to play if you want to start out competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And again, it's a trap heavy strategy that can benefit a bit with Red Reboot gone, but this deck loses to any other back row removal cards and a lot harder than other trap strategies, so you can definitely find better back row decks than this one. Finally, we have DDD here, which really is an insult to those running it since it is definitely stronger than even some of the decks listed in the Rogue section. Unfortunately, there's just not many players running this strategy anymore, and it requires a Galaxy Brain to pilot it as well, so it didn't score too high on the tier list. Alright guys, so that was it for the tier list by the data video for this month. Hope that was helpful. I'll be sure to make a Rogue deck tier list by the data video very soon, so stay tuned for that. As usual, big thanks to my Patreons, Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Barrelord, Spooky Boogie, and Stephen Phillips as always for supporting the channel. You guys are amazing. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, link down below. Take care guys.